I knew I was invisible when the office coffee machine got a software update before I did. 12 hours into another triple shot day, I was elbow deep in a spreadsheet so bloated it needed a defibrillator. My inbox was a graveyard of vendor invoices, budget black holes, and Slack pings from salespeople who thought forecast meant vibes. And yet, as usual, nobody in the C-suite knew I existed, except when the printer jammed or a client threatened to walk. I wasn't hired to be the face. I was the duct tape behind the drywall. I'd spent 5 years in this circus untangling vendor deals that had expiration dates longer than the CEO's memory. I'd restructured our logistics arm without a single layoff, rewrote compliance protocols with a dollar store legal team, and built quiet trust with the one group that mattered now, the buyers circling our shambling company like wolves who'd smelled rot. And still, I was Pam from Ops in every meeting invite. That's how I liked it mostly. Flying below the radar meant I could get things done. While others posted selfies with their dry erase boards, I was managing international vendor fire drills with a headset, 3 monitors, and a power nap between calls. But I'll admit, lately I was tired. Proud, but tired. The kind of tired that no amount of caffeine or inspirational posters could cure. Because when you've cleaned up everyone else's mess for half a decade, you start to wonder if you're the idiot for staying. Still, I wasn't here for applause. I was here for the deal. We were in the final stages of an acquisition by a global player with enough zeros to make the board twitch. My job was simple: clean the books, keep the buyer happy, and try not to strangle our CFO, who thought revenue recognition was a personality type. The buyer's CEO, sharp, strategic, barely spoke, but when he did, he asked questions like, who maintains continuity on post-close ops? The others fumbled, I answered. So when he started copying me directly on diligence threads, skipping our CEO entirely, I knew I was being vetted. Silently, carefully, like a wire being tested for weight load. And if you're still listening at this point, hey, do me a quick favor. Tap that subscribe button and hit like. I promise it keeps the algorithmic gremlins happy and lets the team know you appreciate stories that aren't just recycled LinkedIn humble brags. Now, where were we? Right, acquisition. My entire existence for 3 months boiled down to this transaction. I'd cleaned up years of vendor overpayment schemes, normalized reporting cycles, reconciled payment terms that hadn't made sense since dial-up. Did it all while keeping the buyer's interest warm without smothering them. I was threading a needle during an earthquake, and the needle kept moving. No one in leadership had asked how I was doing. The CEO, who'd once called me Patricia in a board meeting, was busy visioning. Translation, taking long lunches and forwarding emails with thoughts in the subject line. I did the work. He got the credit, but that was fine. I had my little rituals. 6:45 a.m. desk arrival. Friday night burrito with spreadsheets. The monthly cry in the parking garage but make it quiet moment. And of course, my folder, titled If I Vanish, with subfolders for everything from locked vendor credentials to the buyer's preferred integration roadmap. Just in case. They didn't know it, but I was the map. So when I heard the CEO had an exciting leadership update, I felt the kind of dread normally reserved for dental surgery or HR happy hours. I walked into that Monday all-hands meeting knowing something was about to break, and it wasn't going to be the coffee machine this time. The man swaggered in like he'd just invented the concept of work. Troy, nephew of the CEO, MBA from somewhere warm and expensive. Hair too perfect, teeth too white, suit too tight. He waltzed into the Monday all-hands with a Bluetooth earpiece, Yeti tumbler the size of a toddler, and the kind of cocky smile you usually only see on real estate signs and failed Shark Tank pitches. Let's disrupt, he said. First words. No hello, no context, just that. Like he'd confused our struggling logistics company with a startup in a WeWork. The CEO beamed at him like he'd brought fire down from Mount Sinai. Everyone, meet Troy. He's our new executive project lead for the acquisition. He'll be streamlining things and helping us modernize for our next chapter. Which was a corporate way of saying, Troy's driving now. Try not to scream. I sat still. I smiled, but my jaw clenched so hard I could hear molars grinding in stereo. Troy launched into a 10-slide deck full of buzzwords. Synergy targets, disruption zones, cross-functional velocity. At one point, he said we'd be leveraging verticals in the buyer's data ecosystem, which was impressive, considering none of those words belonged in the same sentence unless you were high on printer ink. Then he dropped his first grenade. We'll need the buyer's data room updated within 48 hours, he said, flipping to a slide labeled fast is the NEW accurate. We're prioritizing momentum over perfection. No red tape, no second guessing. I blinked, then raised my hand like a good little soldier. Just to clarify, I said, polite but firm, you want a full diligence upload, financials, legal, vendor files in 48 hours? Without legal review? Troy turned to me like he'd forgotten I had vocal cords. Correct, he said. We don't have time to overprocess. I almost laughed. Overprocess. We were talking about an acquisition involving 30 vendors, 4 international shipping routes, and 2 active legal inquiries, one of which was ongoing because someone else tried to move too fast and ended up in a compliance swamp. I can't in good faith push an unvetted package to the buyer's team, I replied. They'll delay the deal, or worse, flag us. Troy smiled. That smug PR smile that looks like a sticker of a smile slapped on a broken vending machine. Pamela, right? He said, even though we'd just been introduced 30 minutes ago. I appreciate your concern, but you've got a little bit of an old school mindset. This is a new era, fast track everything. If it breaks, we fix it in post. I nodded, slow and deliberate. Acquisition deals aren't YouTube videos, Troy. There is no post. That's when I saw it, the flicker, the first grudge. He didn't say anything else, but I knew I'd made the list. That invisible list of women who don't laugh at his jokes, don't fawn over his jargon, don't blink when he name drops Wharton like it's a personality trait. I'd bruised his ego, and now it would become my problem. 2 hours later, I got an urgent email from Troy asking me to resend a folder I'd already provided last week. No, please. No, thank you. Just resend folder. Also, I need the vendor contracts in a single doc. Vendor contracts in a single doc, as if I was blending a smoothie, not managing 8 years of negotiations. By day's end, he'd rerouted 2 of my vendor calls without telling me, created a new Slack channel called #DealSpeed Hall of Fame, and invited only sales and marketing. He was building his own kingdom, one ping at a time, and me, I was watching the weather change. It wasn't a storm yet, but I could smell the ozone. Troy started slow, like rust creeping up an old pipe. First, it was calendar chaos. Vendor calls I'd scheduled mysteriously moved to times that conflicted with legal reviews. Diligence file names I'd standardized were renamed with nonsense labels like Deal Gold V2 Fina L Final Real a PDF. My carefully curated buyer folder, flagged red for priority, suddenly had bright green emojis next to it, like we were decorating a Christmas tree, not courting a multimillion-dollar acquisition. Then came the meetings. Every time I spoke, he'd cut in, not harshly, slickly, with fake confusion. I think what Pamela's trying to say, let's simplify that for the room, great context, Pam, but let's keep it high level. No need to get too in the weeds. In one leadership huddle, he shared my vendor renegotiation plan, the one I'd spent weeks untangling, with a flourish like he'd authored it himself. He skipped over the hardest part, of course, quiet back-channeling with 2 fragile suppliers that kept the margins afloat. That was invisible labor, my specialty. But the final straw came during what was supposed to be a dry run of the buyer queue and a call. He opened the meeting with a PowerPoint slide that said, in 60-point font, "Is Pamela fit for the future?" No joke, that was the title, in Comic Sans. I sat frozen for a beat, then calmly took a sip of my coffee and said, "You spelled my name wrong." But sure, let's explore this. A few people chuckled. Troy did not. He launched into a meandering spiel about generational leadership gaps and change resistance. I sat through all of it, nodding occasionally like a teacher watching a child try to explain algebra with crayons. When he finished, he looked at me, eyes gleaming with fake magnanimity. "Open floor," he said. "Pamela, thoughts?" I smiled, folded my hands, and said, "Happy to discuss my relevance when the buyer stops emailing me directly for clarification on your slides." Silence. Then a nervous throat clear from someone in finance. Troy didn't respond. He just moved to the next slide. But his eyes, boiling, I could see it, that twitch behind the professional mask. After the meeting, I stepped outside with Janine from legal, one of the few sane voices left. "Did that really happen?" she asked, eyes wide. "It did. And you're fine," I shrugged. "If I leave, this whole deal dies. He just doesn't know it yet." That night, I went home and poured a glass of wine I couldn't taste, sat in the quiet. My apartment was tidy, always was. I kept my chaos at work. But tonight, it followed me home like a stray dog. I opened my laptop and looked at the message thread from the buyer's COO. Last reply, "Appreciate your clarity. We trust your structure." Trust, not a word that floats around lightly in a circles. I clicked new message, then stopped. Not yet. Patience wasn't just a virtue, it was a loaded weapon. You wait until the mask slips. Instead, I updated my contingency notes doc. Added a line at the top, "If Troy fast-tracks buyer call scripts, redirect to buyer counsel." Attached chain of missteps. Flag risk. I knew what he was doing. He wanted to look like the hero who saved a sluggish legacy company from its own bloated processes. Except the only thing bloated was his ego. He thought he could rip up the roots and staple leaves to the branches and still call it a tree. But I was the soil. I was the goddamn ecosystem. And if he wanted to find out what happened when you poison the foundation, I was more than ready to let him. It happened in front of everyone. Tuesday, 10:03 a.m., third floor conference room, the one with the motion sensor lights that always flickered like a haunted basement. We were 10 minutes into the weekly ops sync, and Troy was already pacing like a motivational speaker who'd misplaced his buzzwords. He was holding one of those laser pointers he didn't know how to turn off, so it kept strobing across the table like a tiny epileptic rave. He decided, without consulting legal, finance, or anyone with a functioning brain, that we'd skip the final vendor compliance check and push the rest post-close. The room went stiff. I didn't even look up from my notepad, just said that'll trigger a clause in the purchase agreement and delay escrow. Maybe permanently, that's when it broke. Troy slammed his hand on the table. The laser pointer skidded across the surface and spun off like a casino chip. I'm the big boss, take 2 weeks and you're gone, Pamela. Silence. Actual silence. Not awkward pause. Not people pretending to check Slack. I mean, oxygen left the room, silence. Someone gasped. I heard a paper coffee cup hit the floor. HR, Dina from People and Culture started to speak, then froze like a possum in headlights. No one moved, I didn't flinch, I didn't blink. I didn't ask if he was serious because I already knew the answer. I just nodded, once. The kind of nod you give when you've seen this movie before and you already know how it ends. The kind of nod that makes someone like Troy think he's won. He stormed out of the room like a man who just delivered a climactic speech in a made-for-TV drama, completely unaware that the credits were already rolling, just not for me. I walked out 5 minutes later, went to my desk, and shut my laptop like it was a casket. Then I reopened it, turned off Slack, and pulled up the secure contact channel I hadn't used in months. Redacted subject. Clarification needed. High buyer CEO's first name. Today, internal leadership issued an unexpected personnel notice. You may want to clarify operational continuity before Thursday's review. Please let me know how you'd prefer to proceed. I added the timestamp. Attached a zip file named Foresight1zip, an innocuous title, but inside it held annotated changelogs, email chains of missteps, and one very polite memo I drafted months ago titled Contingency Impact. Leadership instability scenarios. It wasn't vengeance. It was documentation. Then I clicked send. That night I sat on my fire escape with a lukewarm beer and watched the city flicker like static. Somewhere below, a car alarm wailed and died. My inbox stayed quiet, but I knew better. The silence wasn't peace, it was ignition. He thought he'd humiliated me. Thought I'd slink away, pack up my desktop mug, and vanish like an outdated software patch. What he didn't know, what none of them ever knew, was that I had never once made myself irreplaceable. I had simply become inevitable. Troy tried to bury me under speed. 2 days after his outburst, he emailed the entire executive team with the subject line, Acceleration Mode, let's close this thing. In it, he detailed a revised diligence sprint, complete with arbitrary deadlines, linked trees to folders he barely understood, and a Google Doc titled Deal Final Final, which sounded like a toddler naming a transformer. He told legal to skip the nitpicking on indemnity clauses. He told finance to just ballpark the last 2 quarters of vendor spend. He told marketing to prep press copy. Press copy. We didn't even have final numbers, and the man was already picturing his TechCrunch debut. I watched it unfold from a distance like a controlled burn he thought was a bonfire. The real pain started when he opened the buyer's shared drive and realized half the key folders were inaccessible. Vendor audit logs, locked. Custom compliance benchmarks, password protected. The reconciliation database, pointing to a deprecated server that only I had mapped. He fired off a Slack message to IT. Troy, hey, need access to Pamela's files. ASAP. IT, which ones? She had like 20 folders. Troy, all of them. Just give me full perms. IT, we can't. Some of those were moved to her private share. Compliance only. He didn't like that answer. Meanwhile, the buyer's team, usually punctual and polite, started pushing back meetings. The weekly sync was rescheduled due to conflicts. Their COO stopped replying to Troy's emails. Legal sent a dry, 2-line message asking, has Pamela transitioned oversight, or should we postpone formal submission? He didn't forward that one. I saw it because I was still on BCC. Quiet, loyal BCC. Then came the finance spiral. Troy pulled the CFO into a room and demanded she recreate the reconciliation trail. She tried, truly, but she didn't know the aliases I used to spot shadow vendors. Didn't know the invoice tagging schema I'd built from scratch. Within hours, I double-counted freight charges in 3 quarters and somehow reversed a rebate stream that would have tripped a clause in the acquisition contract. Legal called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but I heard about it anyway. Apparently someone asked, wait, wasn't Pamela the one keeping this all tied together? Troy laughed loudly and said, please. She was admin support. She updated folders. We can do this without her. They say denial is the first stage of grief. But in corporate settings, it's usually the last thing a fool clings to before reality throws a brick through the window. I didn't respond. Not to the emails, not to the texts, not to the quick call. Voicemails from the CFO, I watched and waited. And when the buyer's general counsel looped in their own outside firm to review continuity concerns, I just smiled to myself and made another pot of coffee. He wanted to dig a hole and pretend it was a foundation. Let him dig. The first message came through Signal. Short, careful, no subject line. From the buyer's head of post-merger ops, quick check, do you still have your version of the integration map? I stared at it for a second, then typed, define still. A few beats later, the one that made sense. Not whatever Troy just sent. I didn't ask how they got my private contact. I knew exactly how. The quiet allies always resurface when the ship starts to list. The kind who remembered who patched the hull while everyone else posed on the bow. By the end of the day, I'd received 4 similar messages, all discreet. No one wanted to set off alarms, not yet. But the scent of desperation is easy to recognize when you've worked long enough in rooms that smell like cheap toner and cold coffee. They weren't asking me to come back, not officially. They were checking if I was still there. I replied to only one, the buyer's legal liaison. A woman named Robin with the polite tone of someone who could decimate a contract with one red pen. I sent one file, titled Integration Plan Rev 6 Personal Use Only PDF. It was redacted. Lightly, carefully. No company secrets, no vendor names. Just timelines, color-coded flows, contingency paths, and in the corner, a watermark. Draft unofficial do not distribute. I knew it would make its way up the ladder within the hour, because that doc didn't just show planning. It showed intent. It showed I'd been 5 steps ahead of their chaos since the beginning, that I'd built this acquisition to survive them, not rely on them. Meanwhile, back at headquarters, the walls were quietly buckling. The board had been silent since the Troy incident. I assumed they'd backed him, at least initially. But then Janine from legal pinged me on WhatsApp with a single line. One of the board members just asked me why the diligence tracker hasn't updated in 4 days. I told them to ask Troy. By Thursday, 2 directors had sent clarification requests about integration risk factors. One of them attached a spreadsheet I hadn't seen in weeks, my old milestone tracker, stripped of my name but not my formatting. Amateur move. Hadn't even changed the conditional formatting rules. Rookie thieves always forget metadata. That night, I pulled up my contingency doc again. Added a note, observed, buyer team reaching out. Sending non-binding reference materials only. No breach. I wasn't back, not officially. But I was everywhere. My fingerprints were on every framework they were pretending to understand. Every timeline they tried to fast-track. Every vendor contract they couldn't decode. And while Troy was busy chasing calendar invites and scrubbing my name from shared folders, I had already reshaped the narrative. Not loudly, not with declarations, with structure, with systems, with memory. I wasn't reclaiming a seat at the table. I was reminding them who built the Gotham table in the first place. The invite went out as a final buyer alignment meeting. Troy scheduled it for Friday at 9 a.m. sharp, blocked off the executive boardroom, made sure everyone important, or at least everyone he thought was important, was there. The email CC'd legal, finance, sales, and even the CEO himself. Everyone except me. I saw it anyway. Janine forwarded it with a single-word subject line. Attending, I didn't reply. Just packed my laptop, pulled on the blazer I reserved for corporate theater, and walked into that glass-walled tomb at 8:59 a.m. No drama. No grand entrance. Just the subtle hush that hits a room when someone walks in who wasn't supposed to exist anymore. I didn't glance at Troy. Didn't need to. The temperature drop said enough. He was already standing, palms pressed on the table, mid-pitch to the buyer's CEO, a tall, flinty man named Carl, who'd never once raised his voice but could shut down nonsense with a single eyebrow twitch. So with these adjustments to the integration roadmap, Troy was saying, be ready to close within the next 21 days, faster than expected. I walked to the far end of the table, past the rows of nervous finance associates, past legal trying not to make eye contact. No one stopped me. I sat calm, straight-backed. I opened my leather folio, pulled out a single item, my business card. It wasn't a power move, it was a reminder. I slid it across the polished mahogany toward Carl. He paused, looked down, read it. Corners of his mouth twitched, then he laughed, loudly. The room stiffened. Laptops paused mid-click. Troy blinked, confused, like someone had hit him with a plot twist in a language he didn't speak. Carl held the card up for a beat. You're Pamela, he said, no question mark. I inclined my head just slightly. He looked back at Troy, still smiling. But now it was the kind of smile that tasted like teeth. You didn't tell me she'd be here. Troy tried to recover. She's no longer, Pamela's no longer in an operational role. We've, transitioned her responsibilities. Carl didn't take his eyes off me. Is that so? Troy kept going, trying to dance through the fire. We've streamlined oversight. The roadmap has been adjusted. Some of Pamela's earlier documents were, well, they weren't aligned with the new vision. Carl turned back to me. Do you agree with that assessment? I said nothing. Just raised an eyebrow and offered the faintest smile. That silence carried weight. More than 1,000 rebuttals ever could. Carl nodded once. Noted. The buyer's GC leaned toward him, whispered something. Carl chuckled again, then flipped the card once in his hand and placed it in front of him like a talisman. The room exhaled, but the tension didn't leave. It thickened. Troy sat back, blinking too much. I didn't look at him, not once, because this wasn't his meeting anymore. It never had been. Carl tapped my card once with his index finger. A light sound, plastic on wood, but it landed like a gavel. Then he turned his gaze slowly toward our CEO. The man I'd worked under for 5 years. The man who once referred to me as that ops person with the glasses in front of a room full of VCs. So, Carl said, flat and calm, is she fired? He didn't blink, didn't gesture. Just let the question hang in the air like smoke after a detonation. The room froze. Troy straightened in his seat like he was going to answer, lips already parting to launch some carefully rehearsed tap dance about organizational restructuring and streamlined decision-making. But Carl cut him off with a single glance. I wasn't talking to you. Troy wilted. Everyone's eyes swung to the CEO, who looked suddenly smaller in his chair, like someone had siphoned the starch from his spine. He opened his mouth once, closed it, reached for his water but didn't lift it. Carl spoke again just as evenly, because if she is, we'll be withdrawing our offer immediately. We don't do deals without continuity, and she is your continuity. No one dared breathe. The CFO coughed softly. Legal shifted in her seat. Someone's pen clattered to the floor. Then, from the far side of the table, one of the board members, Roger, I think, the one who never made eye contact with anyone under SVP, muttered, just loud enough for the room to hear, you absolute idiot. It wasn't clear who he meant. Maybe Troy for his ego. Maybe the CEO for letting it happen. Maybe all of them for mistaking silence for irrelevance. The CEO finally found his voice, gravelly and brittle. We were re-evaluating roles. It wasn't final. She still has access to, Carl held up a hand. You've had your say. Then he looked at me. Pamela, would you excuse us for a moment? I didn't move. I turned to the CEO, met his eyes, held them. You wanted this public, I said, calm and deliberate. It stays public. Carl sat back just a little, a ghost of a smile playing behind his eyes. He opened his leather portfolio, slid a new folder across the table, one with different tabs, a different logo. The buyer's GC opened it with a soft flick. Pages rustled, pens clicked. The room remained silent. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a reckoning, and the deal was no longer theirs to shape. The CEO tried one last gasp of authority. He turned to me with his voice all cracked porcelain and corporate fatigue. Pamela, could we speak outside for a moment? I didn't even blink. No, I said it soft, but the kind of soft that carries. The kind of soft that turns heads. You wanted public. This stays public. Carl leaned back slightly, as if to say let her speak, and gestured to his legal team. They opened the new folder. Fresh tabs, a different weight to the paper. You could feel it, not just a revised term sheet, a reset of the hierarchy. He slid it down the table toward the CEO. This is our revised offer. The CEO didn't touch it, just looked at it like it might bite him. Carl continued, voice even, almost polite. We're naming Pamela as Executive Integration Officer, effective immediately, reporting directly to our office during the transition window with optional extension. He paused, then added, we'll close today if she accepts. The CEO looked at me, not like a boss, not like a partner, like a man staring at a ghost who never stopped walking. And her terms, he asked, almost a whisper. I tapped the page. Right there, section 4.2, non-negotiable. Everyone leaned forward, even Troy, who hadn't said a word in over 10 minutes. Carl read it aloud. No member of current management, including family appointees, may retain or reassign authority over direct reports without explicit written approval from Pamela Morris or her delegate. Troy flinched like someone had slapped him with a leather glove. Carl looked at him, then back to the CEO. That includes the nephew. The CEO hesitated, then signed. One stroke, ink to paper. That's all it took. Troy stood up like a man trying to outrun humiliation. This is ridiculous, he muttered, reaching for his badge. Leave it, Carl said. Troy stopped, looked around. No one met his eyes. He left without a word, badge still on the table. The room remained frozen for a moment longer, like everyone was waiting to be told what came next. I stood, gathered my folio, looked around slowly. No gloating, no smiles. Just a stillness that belonged to the person who won without ever raising her voice. Carl joined me as I walked toward the elevator. As the doors opened, he leaned slightly closer and said, I knew by your email headers you were the real operator. I smiled, faint and clean. Headers never lie. The doors slid shut. Cut to black. Appreciate you sticking around, you legends of the break room. Subscribe for more chaos. Let's make your old managers spill their coffee in fear.